Within spirituality, you may find yourself depending on certain people for certain skills that they have for a service that they provide. Whether it's a tarot reading, a cleansing, or you just need a ritual done. No matter what, you may find yourself at some point going to someone for some spiritual help. This can be both a relieving process because you don't have to do it yourself. You get a little bit more clarity because you trust the person that you're going to. But this could be a scary process as well because you have to trust the person that you're going to. So finding the right person, finding someone who isn't going to scam you or manipulate you, or finding someone that you're going to for healing that's not going to hex you. Hey y'all, I'm BlaqueWitchYaya. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. And today we are in York County, Pennsylvania. And I know you may be thinking, Yaya, where in the world do you have us at? But in York County, a lot of settlers from Germany practiced and believed in witchcraft. In the early 1900s, a lot of settlers there were practicing magic, which is interesting because just a couple of states over is where the Salem witch trials took place. But here they were all about the bibbity bobbity boo. Not literally, well, kind of literally, because they practice a practice called powwow, which is a form of folk magic originating within the Pennsylvania Dutch, the German Americans. It originated from their community, and this is a blend of traditional European folk practices, religious elements from Christianity, and indigenous beliefs, used primarily for healing, protection, and spiritual well-being rather than harm. Practitioners of powwow were sometimes called hex doctors or powwowers, and they performed rituals. They had charms used for blessings intended to cure for spiritual or physical ailments, and sometimes they worked better or if not quicker than medical treatment. Now, one family that had the powwow practice down pat was the Reimer family, who became a go-to for a lot of people in the community. One person who trusted their skills was a man by the name of Emmanuel. Now, he had a son that fell sick, and it seemed no matter how many spells or rituals that he performed, nothing seemed to work. But in the meantime, he seen his son start to get worse and wither away. So he was getting worried because the more spells he tried to do, the sicker he got. And he began to feel like this could not be anything else but a hex. And this hex was manifesting itself in the form of opnema, which is a malnutrition or wasting away illness attributed to a hex. So Emmanuel knew he had to hurry up and find a solution to his son's illness, which he knew exactly where to go. Nelson Reimer. Nelson was a skilled powwow practitioner who helped people in the community with whatever needs that they were going through at the time. His rituals and remedies were so strong and so popular that his wife grew tired of all the random people who kept coming to the house for his services, so much that she moved into her family's home so Nelson could have the space to himself and she could have her peace in the home without strangers coming every single day. So she moved away. So Nelson, by using his knowledge of powwow, performed a ritual to cure John, the sick son, of all his symptoms, and he was completely healed just by the hands of Nelson. So really quick, let's go over what is a hex, because I know we use that term a lot, but nobody really knows, like, okay, so what exactly is it? A hex is a type of curse or spell cast to bring harm, bad luck, or misfortune to someone, or in this case, illness. Rooted in folk magic and superstition, a hex is typically performed by a practitioner or a person who practices witchcraft, who believes that they can influence others through spiritual or supernatural means. The act of a hex usually involves specific rituals, objects like candles, herbs, or personal items from the person you're trying to hex, and spoken words or chants intended to direct negative energy towards a person. Hexes are common in various cultures, folklore, and differ from general spells by being specifically aimed at causing harm or misfortune, because usually folk magic practitioners, they practice healing, protection, prosperity, but you can also use those same skills and those same words, rhymes, and rhythm to harm someone as well. So that's what a hex is. Basically someone targeting you, sending negative energy and misfortune your way. So back to the story. So John is feeling 100% better now, and he knew the efforts from his father Emmanuel and the skill of Nelson is what healed him. So from there he grew an extreme interest in powwow, which what was used to heal him, because this is what saved his life. So now he wanted to learn all about it. So at the age of 7, John began working for Nelson by picking potatoes for him for 25 cents a day, and in the meantime he was able to study under Nelson, understand what is powwow, how does it work, what's the magic behind it, how do I tap into my inner magic to bring it out, how to use it for rituals. and how Nelson interacted with his clients, all of the things he was able to learn under Nelson. And he was able to take this information and use his natural skills and discovered the healer within himself and was able to begin helping people. So there was one time he was working at a cigar factory where one of his co-workers kept complaining about his eye, and he knew, let me go ask John about this because he'll know exactly what to do. And surely John did. He instructed his co-worker to bring in a dirty plate the next day. The co-worker did just that. John took the dirty plate, pressed it against the inflamed eye of his co-worker while saying a prayer. Afterwards, he took the dirty plate and smashed it on the ground, stomped on it, and traced the cross 3 times over his eye and told him that his eye would be healed the next morning. And surely it was. And this wasn't his last ritual or work that is documented. There was a time when John and his friends were out and about and they were approached by a dog with rabies, and he cured the dog by covering his face and saying a prayer and healed the dog. So he really had healing hands and healing words. But eventually he began to think that his powers faded, and it seemed like it was fading. Okay, so here's the sequence of events. John got ill again. He quit working at the cigar factory so he could focus on the hex. He got sent to an insane asylum, but he did end up escaping. He ended up getting married, and it seemed like his life was going to get better, but his wife had a baby. But the baby ended up passing away from an unknown illness, and the second one passed away from a premature birth. So it was a lot of things going on back to back. John is trying to figure out where in the world did this curse come from, who would target him, who did he hurt where someone felt like they had to get vengeance. So he went to a bunch of witches in the area, and no one could help him until he met up with the Marietta River witch, who told him the one who hexed him was an older man. So John is thinking, okay, who could it be? I interact with a lot of people. I'm not sure who. To make things clearer, the witch said, here. She grabbed a dollar bill and she said, I'm going to put this dollar in your palm, and when I remove it, you're going to see the face of the man that put a hex on you. So she placed the dollar in his hand. She said a chant, she said a prayer. And when she removed the dollar, John was staring eye to eye with Nelson, the man who healed him when he was younger, and the man who he worked under for years to learn about powwow, the man who taught him everything in the world about powwow, used powwow against him to heal him and hex him at the same time. So of course he couldn't believe it. He knew his family, they had events together, they hung out together for decades, but it all started to make sense because one thing that John noticed was on Nelson's farm when he was picking potatoes, Nelson's farm always seemed to be thriving more than the neighboring farm. Like his farm would be prosperous, growing all the crops, making all the money, while the other farms next to him, like the crops looked withered, like no one was watering them, but Nelson was getting all the customers because his land was the only one producing crops. So he's thinking he must have been tricking people into thinking that he was healing them or helping them with their crops when he was actually hexing them. The witch told him, hey, if you want to remove this hex, I'll just need just a few things: a lock of hair so we can bury it 6 feet under, and his spell book, the long lost friend, which is a spell book used by powwow practitioners to protect them from their enemies. So John knew that he would have to come up with a clever way to get a lock of Nelson's hair, and how to take a spell book away from a practitioner was really going to be the hard part, but he came up with a plan. There was a young man by the name of John as well, but we're going to call him by his last name Curry so we don't get confused. So Curry worked with John at the cigar factory and really looked up to him as like a father figure because Curry was young. So John knew he had the power of influence over him. So John told Curry, like, hey, you remember when I told you when I was younger I got really sick and a man healed me, right? Okay, well, come to find out, he hexed me. That's why my life been falling apart and I had to leave here. And he actually hexed you too. That's why you faced all that abuse with your stepfather when you were younger and what you're going through now. So Curry believed him and was willing to help John remove the curse. So in return, he could have his curse removed as well because he was going through it at home in a really abusive household. So John took that information, twisted it to make it seem like, oh yeah, he hexed you too. That's why you're going through that. Just manipulating him so he could have an extra set of hands. So they both paid Nelson a visit. They went over to his house. Nelson invited him in for a drink. He was happy to see them. They sat, they chatted for a bit. And this is where John and Curry are reminded of how big Nelson is, how tall and stocky he is. So they were like, okay, we're going to need some more manpower because I feel like he could take the both of us. So the next day, they actually stayed the night at Nelson's house. That's how good the conversation and friendly it was. So the next day they had breakfast and then they went off to find an extra set of hands. So they went over to a neighboring farm owned by the Hess family and spoke to PD Hess. Now PD is a client of Nelson. He went to him because he felt like someone hexed hexed him and his farm because his crops were dying. Animals were always sick. He couldn't just make nothing out of nothing. He wasn't getting any customers and he wasn't making as much money as he knew he could. But you know who was making all the money? His competition, which was Nelson. So he went to him to have like prosperity with his farm, but come to find out, allegedly Nelson was hexing him at the same time so his farm wouldn't produce as much, so Nelson could keep getting the money, and also they could keep coming to Nelson for his little tidbits and trinkets to actually help out their farm, even though it was just making it worse. So with that information, John told PD, you know why all this is happening? It's because Nelson hexed you. You were going to him for work, but he was just using his access to you to actually hex you. Now granted, John had no proof of it and he was just assuming he was doing that to majority of his clients because he did it to him. So of course PD, just like Curry, fell for it and was like, bet, what do we have to do to get rid of this hex? So John explained that they needed more manpower to take down Nelson. So PD sent his 18-year-old son Wilbert to help John and Curry. So now it's Wilbert, John, and Curry. So they're like, bet, the three of us could take down Nelson. So they went back over to Nelson's home. Nelson was surprised to see them so soon, and John was like, hey, I left something here from last night. Nelson is like, I haven't seen anything, but by all means take a look. And that's when they all attacked him. They rushed in, they wrestled him down to the ground, beat him, and choked him to death. After Nelson took his last breath, John was getting ready to cut a lock of Nelson's hair, but it was so bloody that he just got grossed out and couldn't do it. So they decided to split up and search all over the house for the spell book, but was too scared to check the basement because that's where he did all his workings and they didn't know what they were going to run into. So they decided, let's just burn the body, assuming the curse would burn with the body. So setting Nelson on fire led to the entire house catching on fire. And as they were leaving out the house, they noticed ghostly figures dancing in the flames of the fire, but the house did not burn down all the way. The fire magically extinguished itself, and the fire didn't quite cause enough damage to hide all the evidence that they left behind. Body of Nelson was found from another client who was coming to see him, and they realized like, hey, his farm isn't doing as good. The animals don't seem like they've been tended to as usual. They went into the house to find his dead body in like a hole on the floor. So of course he called authorities, and then they asked Nelson's wife, and Nelson's wife was able to identify them because they came to her door looking for her husband before they went to Nelson's house. So before Wilbert joined along, John and Curry were looking for Nelson. So before they went to Nelson's home, they went to his wife's house like, hey, where's Nelson? We need to speak with him. His wife was like, hey, two guys stopped by. I believe it was them. And of course it was them, which led them to Wilbert as well. They were questioned by authorities, and John confessed to killing Nelson, like proudly confessed. Yeah, I did it. He hexed me, so I had to defend myself. And the only way to do that was to kill the person, right? I mean, that's how you remove a hex. And John thought he was going to be exonerated because he acted in self-defense. Now, even though the community practiced powwow and it wasn't uncommon, they were still shocked by the death because that's not what they use their magic for. And majority of people in York County practice witchcraft, and this powwow wasn't known outside of the population. So subsequently, the trial gained national attention as the media dubbed it the Hex murder. Trial took place in 1929, and Judge Shorewood instructed lawyers to avoid mentioning witchcraft because they didn't want it to cause any chaos or confusion with the jurors. So they did not want to entertain any type of evidence of hexes, and all mentions of witchcraft were to be left out to avoid chaos in the courtroom. And he wanted to focus on the motive of the crime being robbery, even though the three guys only stole a total of $3 worth of items. But he wanted to go based off of tangible evidence and not hocus pocus. So with witchcraft being left out, some people in the community were grateful because they're like, look, leave powwow out of this. Our workings are to heal people, not kill people. We don't even want to be associated with that. They didn't want people to mix what they do and have a negative connotation with it, which I agree, because the last thing we need is more negative press about our craft. While others were like, no, leave witchcraft in because that's the real motive behind what happened. So y'all let me know what y'all think. Do you think they should have left it out and it just be focused on the murder, or the purpose of the murder being, okay, witchcraft, he was trying to remove her hex? Or do you think that could even stand in the court of law? Because the judge feared that the jury, which were people in the community, would show too much sympathy towards the trio because he knew the county practiced witchcraft and would be able to relate to the crime of despair a little bit too much. So they didn't want them to be too lenient, which they didn't, because just after 1 hour of deliberation, the jury found John and Curry Curry guilty of first-degree murder, and Wilbert PD's son was found guilty of second-degree murder. Curry and Wilbert were paroled in 1934, and John was paroled in 1953 after serving 23 years in prison. Many people wonder why the Marietta witch wasn't charged for the influence, but again, they weren't involving witchcraft in the trial, so of course they want to leave the literal witch out. But many people think Marietta influenced John into thinking that it was Nelson who hexed him, so she could eliminate her competition because she knew that Nelson was like the go-to practitioner, so she thought if I could get rid of Nelson, everybody would come to me. After the trial, Nelson's house, which locals called the Hex House, developed a reputation for being haunted. People claimed to see and hear strange sounds and strange figures and feel an eerie presence when they're near the property. The story became embedded in Pennsylvania folklore, symbolizing the dangers of superstition and the tragic outcomes of fear-driven beliefs and curses and hexes. That's why in spirituality, it's important for you to keep a balance between reality and spirituality, because you can go into like psychosis and you're thinking everything is against you. You're operating not how you normally would because you feel like something is after you, like you could get paranoid and too involved in it. So I always say make sure like you remind yourself that you live in reality as well. So today, the Hex House is a historical landmark. Though it remains privately owned, the story has become a cautionary tale about how fear of the supernatural can lead to extreme actions. It's also one of Pennsylvania's most infamous true crime cases, combining elements of folk magic, fear of the occult, and real life horror. So I wanted to go over this story because I know that when you go to spiritual healers, tarot readers, or whoever you're going to for spiritual practices or services, you want to make sure you are able to trust them. I always say try to go by referral. If you know someone that went to someone and their life changed, they seen the outcome, they trust the person, go to them. If they seem too money hungry and too scammery, really trust your intuition. Don't jump at something right away. Don't say, oh my gosh, I need a tarot reader, so you just go to the first one that you find. Really do your research, sleep on it, take your time with it, see if you could do the stuff yourself. I always say do the stuff yourself first. I know that's scary. You may not think that you have the power to do it, but you have the power within you to set your intentions and to get whatever you need done. So to me, that's the most potent type of magic, when you do it yourself. But if you have to go to someone, take your time with it. Don't look for someone when you're too anxious and too emotional, because then you're not going to make good decisions. If you feel uncomfortable, leave. Remember, within spirituality, within the world in general, there's good people and there's bad people. There's good religious people, there's bad religious people. There's good spiritual people, there's bad spiritual people. Some people will use their skills and power of persuasion to their own benefit, which will then sacrifice you and your well-being. Also, another red flag to look for when you're getting spiritual services, if the person has you keep coming back, I'm gonna charge you this much for this, and after this we're gonna do this, and after this we're gonna do this, just keep milking you of your money over and over, and it seems like nothing is getting better but their pockets. Look out for that as well. But also, I feel like this will be good in the comment section. If you have someone in your area that you trust, you go to, and you want to share their information, comment that down below, because it may be someone in your city or state that's looking for someone. So you could say, hey, in Atlanta, I go to this person for a tarot reader. Hey, in California, I go to this person for my cleansings, or whoever. If you want to recommend them, leave that down below. Then we could create like a little catalog of people to go to. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. And like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Until next time, you guys, Ashe, baby.